You made a little over $320,000 last year as an emergency physician, and you still got close enough to losing your marriage that your wife had a lawyer's card on the kitchen table. That is not the version of being a doctor most people picture. They hear the salary, they hear the word physician, they hear saving lives, and they assume you made it. But you live the part nobody sees when the badge comes off and the front door closes. So start there for me. When did you first realize the job that made you feel most useful was quietly wrecking the people waiting for you at home?
The clean answer would be, I realized it slowly. The honest answer is, I knew way earlier than I admitted it. I made around $327 last year with nights and differentials, and from the outside that looks like winning. Inside my house, it looked like me missing dinners, sleeping through Saturdays, walking around like a ghost with blackout curtains taped shut in a room my kids called Dad's Cave. I was helping strangers through the worst 10 minutes of their lives, then coming home too empty to sit through 10 normal minutes at my own table. And the really ugly part is, part of me liked being at the hospital more, because in the ER I knew exactly who I was. At home, I was a husband who was behind, a father who was late, and a man who kept telling himself the paycheck made all of it noble.
That last line is the trap, isn't it? The paycheck starts sounding like proof that the sacrifice must be worth it. Before we get into the marriage piece, give people the real shape of your life. How old are you? Where are you working? How long have you been doing this? And what does that money actually look like once it lands in a real household instead of a fantasy one?
I'm 39. I've been an attending emergency physician for a little over 8 years, and I work at a level 1 trauma center in Phoenix. My base is a little over 300 grand. Then nights, holidays, and extra shifts pushed it to that 327 number. By the time taxes, retirement, health insurance, and all the grown-up stuff comes out, what actually hits checking feels more like 15 grand and change a month. Which sounds huge, and I know it is huge compared to most people, but then it's a $3,600 mortgage, around $2,200 a month on loans, the kids, groceries, car insurance, everything that comes with trying to be a family in a city that got way more expensive than people admit. My wife Elena used to joke that we were high income and time poor. That was her polite way of saying the money was real, but so was the loneliness. And the benefits are fine, sure. Good insurance, decent match. None of that tucks your daughter in when you're resuscitating somebody else's kid at 1 in the morning.
People outside medicine hear emergency physician and imagine nonstop sirens, chest compressions, helicopters, and TV drama. But the thing that burns people down usually lives in the repetition, the rhythm, the way the job keeps invading your body even when you're technically off. So walk me through a real week, not the glamorous version. The one your wife and kids had to organize their lives around.
A real week is chaos with a payroll department. I might do 2 day shifts, then a swing, then 2 overnights, then try to pretend my body can convert back into a husband on 48 hours of wrecked sleep. In emergency medicine, you don't just work hard. You work it weird. You work when everyone else is grilling, opening gifts, watching a game, going to church, sleeping, waking up. My shifts were usually 10 or 12 hours, but nobody tells you the shift is not the shift. The shift is the hour before where you're already bracing, the half hour after where you're charting and replaying things, and the zombie period at home where you're technically present but not human yet. Phoenix makes nights even stranger. You walk out at 7:30 in the morning, it's already bright and hot. Your body thinks it has been hit by a truck, and the rest of the world is just getting coffee and acting normal. Meanwhile, you're trying to sneak into your own house, not wake the kids, not wake the dog, not let the sunlight tell your brain it's time to be alive. You end up living in this parallel schedule where even your days off are really recovery days.
And that parallel life can make regular family needs feel almost insulting. I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean it in a human way. You spend all night in trauma rooms, then your kid spills cereal, or your spouse asks you to call the plumber, and your nervous system doesn't know how to downshift. Did that happen to you?
All the time, and I hate how long it took me to admit that. I'd come home after a stabbing or a code or some psych patient swinging at staff, and Elena would say the dishwasher was leaking, or Sophia needed poster board for school, or Mateo had been coughing all night, and some ugly part of my brain would think, nobody is dying. Why is this the emergency? I usually didn't say that out loud, but my face said it. My silence said it. The way I walked past people and went straight to the shower said it. That job can make you emotionally lopsided if you're not careful. You get so used to catastrophic stakes that ordinary love starts feeling quiet, and quiet can feel invisible when your body is trained to respond to alarms. The shameful part is that family life isn't less important because it isn't dramatic. It's more important. But I was rewarding myself internally for being great in crisis while being mediocre in the small daily things marriage actually runs on. And kids feel that, man. They don't need your resume. They need your eyes on them when they talk.
That's the contradiction I wanted to sit in. Because on one side, this is deeply meaningful work. On the other side, it can turn meaning into ego if you aren't careful. When you were in the middle of that, did you feel proud, resentful, trapped, superior? All of it at once?
All of it at once is exactly right. I was proud because I am good at this job. I can walk into a room where everyone else is panicking and get calm. I can intubate under pressure, run a resuscitation, make fast decisions with incomplete information, and there is real pride in that. I was also resentful because hospitals love to call you a hero while emailing you about throughput metrics and patient satisfaction like you're running a hotel with IV pumps. I was grateful for the money. I was angry that the money started becoming my alibi. I was exhausted, but also weirdly addicted to being needed. That is the part doctors don't like saying out loud. There's a narcotic quality to being the person who matters in the room. At home, nobody claps because you took out the trash without being asked. Nobody says, "Wow, incredible save, you made it to bedtime." So I drifted toward the arena where the feedback was immediate and the role was clear. That sounds awful, because it is awful. But it's also true.
When did Elena start naming what was happening before you did? Because usually the spouse sees the pattern first. They don't always have the perfect language for it, but they know when the marriage has started orbiting a career instead of two people.
She saw it before I had the courage to. Elena's not dramatic. She doesn't do the screaming, throwing a plate version of conflict. She gets precise. At first, it was little sentences. You said you'd be home by lunch. You fell asleep on the couch while Sophia was showing you her drawing. Mateo asked if you were working again, and I didn't know what to tell him. Then it got sharper. She said, "I am tired of running this family around your recovery cycle." That line hit because it was true. Everything in our house bent around my exhaustion. The kids had to be quieter because Dad was sleeping. The curtains stayed closed because Dad was on nights. We skipped things because Dad might get called to cover. Holidays were negotiations. Date nights felt like hostage exchanges with a scheduler. And Elena wasn't mad that I worked hard. She was mad that work got my most alert, most disciplined, most compassionate self. And home got the leftovers. That is a brutal thing to hear from someone who still loves you.
Was there a moment before the real breaking point? Maybe a missed event, a fight, something small on paper but huge in what it revealed, where you could feel the marriage slipping and still kept going the same way.
Yeah, Sophia had a school music thing. Not some life or death milestone to the world, but to a 7-year-old it was everything. She had one line in a song, and she practiced it in the kitchen for a week like it was Madison Square Garden. I had the night before off. I had the next shift later. On paper, totally makeable. Then one of the guys in our group had a family issue and asked if anyone could cover part of an earlier swing. I told myself I'd do the decent colleague thing, get out in time, still make the concert. Of course I didn't. There was a boarding mess, then a chest pain workup that turned ugly, then a drunk trauma transfer, and suddenly I'm watching a grainy phone video in the physician lounge while my daughter scans the crowd for me. I came home with this stupid stuffed animal from the hospital gift shop, like that was going to patch it. Sophia was asleep in her dress. Elena looked at me and said, Do not turn your absence into a present. That one stayed in my ribs for a long time.
All right, take me to the night that nearly finished it. I want the exact version. Where were you? What happened in the hospital? What happened at home? What did you walk into?
It was late August, monsoon season. One of those Phoenix nights where the sky looks angry before anything even happens. I was on my second overnight in a row. Early in the shift, we had a teenager come in after a rollover, bad head injury, chest trauma, the whole room moving at that clipped speed where nobody has to raise their voice because everyone already knows the stakes. We got him back. Barely. Later, there was a psych patient who took a swing at one of our nurses and caught my shoulder in the mess of it. Then around 3 in the morning, we had a pediatric drowning. Little boy. Backyard pool. We worked him for a long time. Too long, if I'm being blunt. There is a point in some resuscitations where you're treating the family as much as the patient, because everybody in the room knows where this is going, even if nobody says it yet. I walked out of that room feeling hollowed out. Checked my phone and saw a bunch of missed texts from Elena. Mateo had an asthma flare around 1. Not full catastrophe, but bad enough that she took him to an urgent care, then to an ER because his breathing wasn't settling the way she liked. And here's the line that still destroys me. She didn't call me to come. She only texted updates. She said later, "I knew you weren't available unless one of us was actually dying, and I was tired of auditioning for your attention." I got home after shift, still smelling like sanitizer and stale coffee. There was dried blood on the side of my shoe from earlier, and I remember noticing it on the tile in our kitchen. Elena was sitting there with Mateo's discharge papers, Sophia's backpack, and a business card from a family attorney. Not divorce papers, but close enough that my body understood the message before my brain did. She had a yellow legal pad with dates on it. Sophia's concert. Our anniversary dinner I turned into a nap. Her dad's biopsy appointment. A counseling session I canceled because I picked up. The night Mateo threw up and she cleaned him in the sheets alone while I was at work. She slid the pad toward me and said, "You keep saving families that aren't yours. I wish I could tell you I had some beautiful speech ready. I didn't. I just stood there, absolutely useless in my own kitchen."
That's brutal. Because on one level, you had just done exactly what society tells doctors to do. You showed up. You handled the trauma. You kept people alive. And then you came home and found out your own house no longer believed your showing up counted. Did you feel misunderstood in that moment? Or did you know she was right?
Both. And that's what made it so painful. There was a selfish part of me that wanted to say, "Do you know what I just walked out of? Do you know what I carried tonight? Do you know what happens if I don't do my job well?" All that was true. And Elena still had the deeper truth. She wasn't grading me on whether I saved lives at work. She was telling me I had built a family that kept learning how to function without me emotionally, because I was either absent or recovering or defended by the nobility of my profession. Work had made me competent in crisis and lazy in intimacy. In the ER, if a monitor changes, I move. At home, if Elena's tone changed or the kids got quieter around me or disappointment kept piling up, I told myself we'd handle it later. Later is where marriages go to die. So yes, I felt unseen for about 30 seconds. Then I felt ashamed, because standing there in scrubs, trying to explain why I missed my own kid's breathing scare to a woman who had been single parenting beside me, there was no heroic angle left.
You mentioned the nights earlier, and I don't think people understand how much of this story is physiological before it's emotional. The sleep inversion, the appetite changes, the irritability, the weird loneliness of waking up while everybody else is halfway through a day. What did nights do to your body and your personality?
Nights turned me into a version of myself my family never chose. I would get home when the sun was already punching through the blinds. I'd wear sunglasses to the driveway like I was some hungover criminal trying not to get recognized. We'd have blackout curtains, white noise, the room cold as a meat locker, and still your body knows something is off. You're sleeping while leaf blowers are happening, while deliveries are happening, while your own life is happening. Then you wake up groggy at 4 in the afternoon. The kids are already in motion. Your wife has been carrying the whole day, and you're trying to enter the family mid-scene like an understudy. Nights also do something spiritually strange. You stop sharing time with normal people. Holidays become abstract. Barbecues are for somebody else. Saturday mornings are a rumor. You feel useful, but also detached, like the rest of the world is on one planet and you're living on another. I got shorter, less patient, more chemically dependent on caffeine and routine. And maybe worst of all, I started acting like that damage was just the price of excellence. That mindset can rot you.
There's another layer in emergency medicine that people almost never see unless they've lived it. The violence, the volatility, the administrative pressure, the sense that you're supposed to be infinitely compassionate inside a system that's increasingly transactional. Did that harden you too?
Absolutely. People imagine the hardest part is only the dying. Sometimes the hardest part is the living, the screaming, the intoxicated guy spitting at staff, the family member filming you while you explain why their loved one has to wait, the administrator talking about door-to-dock times after a shift where you had 2 hallways full of human misery and not enough beds. I've been cursed at, threatened, shoved, and treated like a waiter with a medical degree. And if you don't watch yourself, that starts to calcify into cynicism. You begin every encounter guarded. You stop being surprised by bad behavior. That is useful for surviving shifts. It is terrible training for marriage. Because home requires softness. Home requires curiosity. Home requires the assumption that the person across from you is not your adversary. I brought too much armor through my own front door. Elena didn't marry a shield. She married a man. At some point, she couldn't find him under all the coping mechanisms.
I want to push on this part because it's where a lot of men hide, especially competent men. You can blame the system, the schedule, the hospital, the specialty, and a lot of that is fair. But was work also a place you chose because it let you avoid the parts of life where you felt less masterful?
Yeah, that's the part therapy forced me to stop dressing up in noble language. I did choose it, and I kept choosing the worst version of it in some ways. The debt was real. The mortgage was real. Providing was real. But if I'm honest, not every extra shift was about necessity. Some of them were about escape. In the ER, the feedback loop is immediate. You do something, it matters. People know it mattered. At home, the work is repetitive and subtle and humbling. You have the same conversation with a kid 6 times. You apologize, you repair, you show up again. Nobody hands you a trophy because you stayed calm through bedtime. I liked arenas where competence could hide my immaturity, and I used the language of sacrifice to make that look respectable. That hurts to say because I do love my family deeply, but love without disciplined presence starts becoming sentiment. Elena did not need more sentimental speeches from me. She needed less heroic self-image and more dishes, more listening, more, no, I won't pick up this shift.
What were the kids clocking that you maybe didn't realize they were clocking? Because children have a terrifying ability to summarize the truth in one sentence.
They saw everything. Sophia got efficient around me. That broke my heart once I finally noticed it. She'd save stories for Elena because she knew Mom was fully there. With me, she'd do these tiny little trial balloons. Like she'd start telling me something and watch my face to see if I was actually present. Mateo went through a phase of asking whether I was sleeping or working before he asked whether I could play. Think about how sad that is. Your son learns your status before your availability. One time he brought me his toy stethoscope and said, "Now you can be the doctor here." He meant it sweetly. I almost lost it. And the scariest part is kids normalize whatever home gives them. If we hadn't interrupted that pattern, they would have grown up thinking dad is loving but peripheral, the fun visitor, the tired provider, the guy who means well and misses things. I did not want to become a childhood explanation they spent years translating in therapy.
So after the lawyer card, after the yellow pad, after the kitchen floor moment, what changed in reality, not in intention? because everybody has a come to Jesus speech. Fewer people actually restructure their life.
The first thing that changed was I stopped acting like insight was the same thing as repentance. I told my group I was done picking up extra shifts for the foreseeable future unless it was a true emergency. That cost money, and it also cost me status with the guys who pride themselves on always being available. I started therapy on my own, and Elena and I did counseling together. We made brutal little household rules that probably sound unromantic but saved us. No checking charts from the dinner table. No sleeping through every post-night family day by default without discussing it ahead of time. If I miss something important, I don't come home with gifts and perform guilt. I own it. I repair it. We also built a hard calendar around the kids that had the same seriousness as a work schedule. That sounds obvious, but before then, family plans were always soft, and work was always concrete. I had to reverse that, and I cut my shifts slightly, which meant a pay cut. Not life-ending, but enough to make my provider ego sweat. Good, it needed to sweat.
Here's the part people don't expect. Sometimes when someone finally gets more of the life they said they wanted, they discover they don't know how to inhabit it. Did that happen to you when you cut back?
Completely. That was the surprise nobody prepares you for. I thought reducing shifts would feel like instant relief, and some of it did. But another part of me got restless and weird. I'd be at my son's soccer practice and catch myself craving the intensity of a trauma activation. I'd be making coffee in my own kitchen and feel this dumb, guilty thought like, I should be somewhere more important. That's poison, by the way. But it was there. I had built too much of my identity around being urgently needed. Domestic life felt slow, and slow felt like irrelevance, until I retrained my brain. Therapy helped me see that adrenaline had become a kind of counterfeit meaning for me. Real meaning is slower. It's repetitive. It's not cinematic. It's showing up for ordinary Tuesday stuff until people trust your presence again. That was harder than any airway, because an airway either goes in or it doesn't. Rebuilding trust at home is messier. There is no procedure note. No shift ends. You just keep proving it.
That is such an important distinction. Urgent versus important. Let's talk about the part of the job you still love, because I don't want to flatten this into medicine bad, family good. That would be fake. What still lights you up in the ER after all of this?
The immediacy still gets me. There's something sacred about being invited into the worst moment of somebody's life and not panicking. I love that emergency medicine strips away performance. Nobody cares where you trained when their wife can't breathe. They care whether you can think, whether you can act, whether you can tell the truth without flinching. I love the team aspect too. Nurses, techs, respiratory, everyone moving in a room with that weird, half-chaotic, half-beautiful choreography. And I love the smaller wins more now than I used to. The old guy who was terrified and you sat down for 2 minutes and actually explained what was happening. The anxious mom who relaxes because you made the room feel less frightening. The person who comes in convinced they're dying and leaves steadier because you didn't treat them like a burden. That's the part worth protecting. What's not worth protecting is the version of medicine that demands your whole soul and calls it professionalism.
Has Elena ever said something in counseling that changed the way you understood all of this? Not just your schedule, but your marriage itself.
Yeah, she said, I never wanted you to love the hospital less. I wanted you to stop loving being unreachable. That sentence rearranged the whole story for me, because I had framed everything as, she doesn't understand the demands, she wants me to be less committed, she doesn't get what the job requires. What she was actually saying was, you've started using the demands as a protected identity. If you're unreachable, nobody can ask more of you emotionally. If you're exhausted, nobody can challenge you without feeling cruel. If you're saving lives, who wants to be the spouse nagging about dishes and school pickups? She saw the loophole before I did. That doesn't mean the job isn't brutal. It is brutal. But marriage almost ended because the brutality of the job met the convenience of my defenses. That's a much harder truth than just blaming medicine. It's also the only truth that gave me any power to change.
What about guilt? Not abstract guilt, specific guilt. The stuff that still wakes you up or hits you in the chest when the house is quiet.
Specific guilt is easier to name. I feel guilty that Elena learned how to carry so much without asking me twice. I feel guilty that my daughter got used to checking whether I was tired before deciding if I was safe to approach. I feel guilty that I made money and still managed to act scarce, which is a rotten combination. I feel guilty that I sometimes came home from a shift with enormous tenderness for a stranger's grief and almost none left for the people who'd been loving me through my own unraveling. And I feel guilty that part of me still misses the clean edges of the hospital more than I'd like to admit. That's the ugly one, because I don't want my family to feel like they're competing with my calling. But the only way through guilt, at least for me, has been turning it into action instead of theater. No more dramatic self-condemnation, just changed behavior, over and over, until maybe the people I hurt believe the new pattern more than the old one.
If somebody watching this is a med student, resident, young attending, or the spouse of one, and they're hearing themselves in this story, what are the early warning signs that the marriage is not just strained, but actively being hollowed out?
When your home life is organized around protecting your recovery instead of building your relationship, that's a sign. When your spouse stops asking whether you'll make it and starts assuming you won't, that's a sign. When you use your profession to end arguments before they start, huge sign. If every missed event gets explained by importance and none of them get repaired, you're in trouble. If your kids start acting more comfortable with your absence than your presence, you're already late. And here's another one physicians hate hearing. If work is where you feel most admired, most competent, and most innocent, be careful, because that can turn the hospital into a hiding place. The job will always present reasons you can't show up at home. It is relentless like that. So if you don't make conscious, sometimes expensive decisions to defend your marriage, the system will happily spend it for you.
Where are things now? Not the polished answer, the real one. Are you good? Are you fragile? Are you rebuilding? What's true in March of your life right now?
We're better. Better is the honest word. Not fixed. Not some movie ending where one kitchen conversation turned me into a perfect husband. Elena trusts me more than she did a year ago, but trust comes back in drops and leaves in buckets. The kids feel me around more, and I can tell because they don't scan me the same way. They just come to me now. That sounds small until you've lost it once. I am also more fragile than I look. I still have nights where I come home wired and angry at nothing. I still catch myself wanting to volunteer for the extra shift because the hospital feels cleaner than the mess of real life. The difference is, now I know what that urge is. I don't romanticize it, I name it. And I think Elena finally believes I am not just trying to save the marriage because I got scared. I am trying to become a man who can be trusted inside one.
You told my team before we started rolling that you have a decision coming up right now. Like right now, not metaphorically. That could reshape all of this again. Tell people what that is.
I got offered two paths. One is to stay where I am and take on a lead role that comes with more meetings, more politics, more ownership, but potentially fewer nights over time. The other is to move to a lower acuity suburban ER group with a cleaner schedule and less trauma, and probably take a meaningful pay cut. 10 years ago, the answer would have been obvious. I'd take the bigger title, the bigger check, the busier place, and tell myself my family would benefit in the long run. Now it scares me because I know exactly how seductive that logic is. Elena didn't give me an ultimatum, which somehow makes it harder. She just said, "Choose the life you actually want us to remember." That is a brutal sentence to carry, because my daughter starts middle school next year. My son is finally at the age where he looks for me in the stands. I don't get infinite drafts of this.
That line from Elena is the ending of a lot of illusions. Choose the life you actually want us to remember. When you put your younger self in front of you, the guy in med school, the guy in residency, the guy still convinced noble work automatically produces a noble life, What do you tell him?
I tell him this: your ability to endure doesn't make every burden worth carrying. Just because you can survive a schedule doesn't mean your marriage should have to. Don't confuse being admired with being known. Don't marry someone and then ask them to build a life around your absences like that is a privilege. Pay attention when your partner's complaints get quieter, not louder. Loud is annoying. Quiet is dangerous. And stop telling yourself you'll be more present later, after the debt, after the promotion, after the next contract, after the kids are older. Later is a scam people like me buy because it flatters our self-image. Also, call your wife back faster. Sit on the floor with your kids even when you're tired. Let your family have calendar authority, not just emotional leftovers. That younger version of me thought love could wait behind purpose. He was wrong.
What do you wish regular people understood about physicians like you? Without turning doctors into saints, because you clearly don't want that either.
I wish people understood that a lot of doctors are both privileged and hurting at the same time. Those things are not mutually exclusive. We make good money. We also pay in ways that don't show up on tax forms. The job can distort your sleep, your nervous system, your identity, your marriage, your relationship with ordinary life. That doesn't make us victims. It makes us human beings in a demanding profession. I also wish people understood that competence is not immunity. The doctor who looks calm in the trauma bay may be absolute garbage at asking for help in his own kitchen. And one more thing. Please stop feeding the hero narrative like it's a compliment. Hero is a dangerous word because it encourages self-erasure and makes terrible boundaries sound noble. Most of us don't need more mythology. We need better systems, better schedules, more honesty, and enough humility to admit that the people loving us at home are carrying part of this career too.
You know what stays with me from this conversation? It isn't the salary, even though the salary is what pulls people in. It isn't even the lawyer card, though that's the image they'll remember. It's the difference between being excellent in emergencies and being trustworthy in ordinary life. Those are not the same muscle, and a lot of high performers confuse them for years. You can be the calmest person in a room full of chaos and still be failing the quiet people who need you most. You can save strangers and still force your own family to adapt around your absence. And you can also, if you're honest enough, interrupt that before the story hardens into regret. That's what I hear in you. Not a clean redemption arc, something better. Accountability with skin in the game.
That's exactly how it feels. I don't need people to walk away thinking, wow, doctors have it so hard. I need them to hear that meaningful work can still deform you if you don't guard the rest of your life on purpose. I still love emergency medicine. I probably always will. But I don't want my kids' main memory of that love to be a closed bedroom door and a tired man saying, maybe later. For a long time I thought providing was the proof of love. Now I think presence is. Not perfect presence, not constant presence, just dependable presence. The kind that lets your wife exhale and your kids stop checking your face before they speak. If I do leave some money on the table to keep that, good. That'll be the cheapest expensive decision I ever make.